Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 873 for May 31st, 2021. Coming up in a few minutes.
We wanted to show off not just the place of New York, but how the rye grows up here. You know, we have a shorter growing season, but we have a little more warmth than they get up in Canada. So we're kind of in a neat middle zone, and the rye takes on some unique characters that way.
It's been 6 years since a group of New York State craft distillers joined forces to come up with the Empire Rye designation to help promote the state's rye whiskey heritage, and 4 years since the first Empire Ryes hit the market. What started out as a group of 6 has now grown to more than 20. Jason Barrett of Black Button Distilling in Rochester was one of those pioneers, and he'll join us later on WhiskyCast In-Depth. I'll also have the What I'm Tasting This Week department, your voice, and Behind the Label. The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast. Lots of talk about the Friends reunion, I see. Always found it a bit strange that they're splashing around in a fountain all carefree. Who does that? Oh wait, I do. Every morning in a bird bath with my friends.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Hi, I'm Gabriel from Dewar's Blended Scotch Whisky. I love sharing stories about Dewar's, and our newest innovation, Portuguese Smooth, has a great one. It's the tale of Scotland and Portugal, centuries of tradition meeting in one delicious bottle. Curious? Try it for yourself. You won't be disappointed.
Let's get started with the news. While the whiskey tariffs stemming from trade disputes between the U.S. and its trading partners in Europe have been getting most of the headlines lately, disputes between Great Britain and India over whiskey have been around for a long time. India has been hitting foreign whiskey imports with a 150% import tariff for years, and many Indian states tack on their own taxes on top of the national tariff. The British and Indian governments have now opened talks on a new free trade agreement, and India's whiskey tariffs are one of the items on the agenda. According to the Financial Times, Prime Minister Boris Johnson's government wants that agreement to include a cut in tariffs for Scotch and other UK whiskies. The stumbling block in the past has been India's insistence that Great Britain and other countries accept the domestic Indian whiskies distilled from molasses as, quote, whiskey. UK and European law traditionally define whiskey as being distilled from grain and have not allowed those Indian spirits to be sold as whiskey. There is no word on whether the UK would have to accept that compromise in this round of trade talks. On the business front, Heineken and Distell have confirmed that the two companies are discussing a potential deal that could see the Dutch brewing giant acquire a majority stake in Distell. Both companies have said that there is no certainty that a deal will be reached, and it's not clear whether Distell's whiskey business would be part of any deal. Distell owns the Bunnahabhain, Tobermory, and Deanston distilleries in Scotland, along with the James Sedgwick distillery in South Africa. Analysts have suggested that Heineken's interest in Distell is focused on improving its access to the South African market. It's possible that the spirits business could be spun off to another buyer if a deal does happen. Fortunately, those are the only stories on the politics and business of whiskey this week. That leaves us free to talk about new whiskeys. Glenmorangie is out with the latest release in its Bondhouse No. 1 series, named for one of the oldest warehouses at the distillery. The 23-year-old Grand Vintage Malt 1997 was finished for 13 years in Bordeaux wine casks from Chateau Montrose in France. It's been bottled at 43% ABV and will sell for around $900 a bottle in the U.S. The Whiskey Exchange is winding up its 20th anniversary celebration with a special collection from its Perfect Measure range. Sukhinder Singh and his team picked from the many, many whiskeys released over the last 2 decades for its 20 Whiskeys That Changed the World collection. The tasting kit comes with 30 milliliter samples of each of the 20 whiskeys and 2 Perfect Measure tasting glasses. During a Zoom tasting with whiskey writers this week, Sukhinder said it wasn't that hard to winnow down the final choices.
These whiskeys, for me, it was just like, what whiskeys are important? And I just sat down. Of course, I probably started with a list of maybe 30, 35, and then we condensed them down to 20.
Some of the whiskeys included in that collection include the Macallan 18-year-old Sherry Oak, the Dalmore King Alexander III, Blanton's Gold Bourbon, Talisker 18, and the Compass Box Hedonism Single Grain. The collection goes on sale this Friday through the Whiskey Exchange website for £150 each. We have a link for more details at the WhiskyCast website. It's been 2 years since we talked with veteran whiskey maker Max McFarlane about joining the Ardgowan Distillery project along the River Clyde west of Glasgow. Now he's created the second release in Ardgowan's Clyde-built series. Shipwright is a blended malt, using mostly whiskeys from Speyside and Highland distilleries. It's available in the UK and through the Ardgowan website for around £50 a bottle. Construction on the distillery itself has been delayed. Meanwhile, Glen Murray Distillery has debuted a new private cask collection. The first release is a 13-year-old single malt finished in Marsala wine casks. Only 238 bottles will be available in the UK. There is no word on pricing. The next release will be for the U.S. market and will be a Bordeaux wine cask finished 10-year-old malt. China will get a 26-year-old Madeira cask finish as well later this year. Douglas Lang & Company is launching a mini-series of Old Particular special bottlings under the Cheers to Better Days banner. The series includes single cask bottlings of 12-year-old malts from Linkwood, Jura, and Bunnahabhain, along with a 16-year-old Port Dundas single grain. The Jura and Port Dundas whiskies will be available at whiskey shops in key global markets, while the Bunnahabhain will be an exclusive for the Asian market. The Linkwood will be available exclusively through the Douglas Lang website. While the pandemic means there are no in-person events this week on Islay during Fégile Week, just virtual ones, the online version of the Islay Festival is actually a day longer this year. That's because the folks at Jura Distillery decided to move their virtual events to this coming Sunday. Yes, it's on a different island, but Jura has always been a part of the Islay Festival. Jura's Kieran Healy-Ryder gave us a preview during Friday night's Happy Hour live webcast.
As it's Sunday, we are the day after a very big Fish Isle event on Islay, so live online for folks to dial in. So after you've taken part in that huge celebration with those guys, you can join us for brunch. We have Bloody Marys with Stevie Martin and a whole load of things going on in the morning. And then through the afternoon, we're working with a really great guy who's based where I am in Glasgow called Andy Gemmell. And we've got some really interesting beer pairings going on. So if you're into beer pairing, Andy Gemmell is a genius for flavour-based selection. So Andy and our team will be taking us through that. And then later on the Sunday, we've also got some events going on with our distillery manager, Graham Logan. And what a year he has had. I think running a distillery on Jura is tough at the best of times, but he's going to be sharing some of the stories for how they've gone through the pandemic year and some of the things that are to look forward to on Jura moving forward.
There will also be a Jura Festival bottling available online. It's an 18-year-old distillery edition bottled at 57.1% ABV. That will go on sale online June 6th for £140 per bottle. White & Mackay is donating £25 from each bottle sold to the Jura Music Festival, which will be held virtually this September because of the pandemic. In the U.S., Diageo's Orphan Barrel brand is releasing its latest bottling. Copper Tongue is a 16-year-old bourbon distilled at Cascade Hollow Distillery in Tennessee and gets its name from the copperhead snakes native to the region. It's a cask-strength bourbon bottled at 44.9% ABV and will be available in select U.S. markets for around $100 a bottle. And while Penderyn is, of course, a Welsh whiskey, its latest release is a U.S. exclusive. It's a 10-year-old single-cask bottling that spent 2.5 years in an ex-bourbon cask and the final 7.5 years in a ruby port cask. 231 bottles will be available in the U.S. The recommended retail price is $150 a bottle. And, by the way, Penderyn has now fired up the still at its second distillery, this one in the Welsh resort town of Llandudno. The project has been in the works for several years and features a Faraday still identical to the one at Penderyn's original distillery. It produces spirit off the still at a whopping 92% ABV. The new distillery will produce Wales's first peated single malt whiskey. It opens to the public for tours starting on Tuesday. And finally, cats have been a fixture around distilleries in Scotland for years, just to make sure the mice don't get out of hand. Of course, there are a lot of distillery dogs, too, though most of them usually don't do much more than look cute and beg for tummy rubs. Then there is Rocco, who may make the dogs at other distilleries look positively lazy by comparison. He's a 1-year-old Cocker Spaniel at the William Grant & Sons Girvan Distillery, and his job is to use his nose to sniff out any imperfections in the casks maturing on site at Girvan. You see, dogs have much finer senses of smell than humans. Rocco worked with a trainer for 6 months to figure out what smells to look out for. We'll find out just how good Rocco is at his job in a few years, when the casks he's keeping track of mature. We can only hope the whiskey from them doesn't smell of kibble or bacon treats. You can keep up on the latest whiskey news all week long at WhiskyCast.com. If you missed our 2-hour-long Happy Hour live webcast Friday night with Waterford Whiskey's Mark Rainier and Kieran Healy-Ryder of Jura, the on-demand replay is available at the WhiskyCast YouTube channel. This week, Ardbeg's Colin Gordon is scheduled to join us again after a last-minute conflict kept him from joining us the other night. We'll get started at 5 p.m. New York time, 10 p.m. London time, and 2100 GMT on the WhiskyCast YouTube channel, our Facebook page, Twitter, and Twitch. Time now for the WhiskyCast calendar of events brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling. We do have one late-breaking cancellation to note. The National Whiskey Festival, scheduled for this Saturday in Edinburgh, Scotland, has now been postponed indefinitely because of pandemic-related health restrictions. We'll let you know when it's been rescheduled. Ardbeg's Monsters of Smoke bus tour continues with tour stops in South Florida and Iowa this week. Whiskey Live Sydney is this Friday and Saturday in Australia. The Virginia Craft Spirits Roadshow kicks off its 2021 tour on June 12th in Richmond, Virginia, and Teeling Whiskey Company in Dublin, Ireland is celebrating its 6th anniversary with a virtual cocktail masterclass that same day. The Brandy Library in New York City is bringing back its Spirit School tastings with an American whiskey class on June 15th. Whiskey and Barrel Night New York is on the 17th, and Sagamore Spirits' next Whiskey on the Waterfront event is on June 19th in Baltimore, Maryland. Right now, we have 173 different live and virtual events on our searchable calendar at WhiskyCast.com. The calendar of events is brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling, makers of the Virginia Rye Whiskey. You'll find their Roundstone Rye at fine whiskey shops in 26 U.S. states, 3 continents, and online. Visit the Where to Buy page at CatoctinCreekDistilling.com to find a retailer near you. And please drink responsibly.
The story of Dewar's Portuguese Smooth is also the story of Stephanie McLeod, winner of the Master Blender of the Year award for the past 2 years and the first woman to win the award, period. Stephanie dreamed up the curious idea of finishing 8-year-old Dewar's Scotch in port barrels, and when Stephanie has an idea, it's usually a good one. The result is like nothing else you've ever tasted, with hints of apricots and honeydew melon, red cherries, and rich vanilla. It's a celebration of Portugal and Scotland, and life in general. So grab a bottle and start writing some stories of your own.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Oban and the Classic Malts lineup. Back in the days before Prohibition, New York's distillers were known for their rye whiskies. Of course, Prohibition eliminated the Empire State's entire distilling industry, at least the legal one. The rise of craft distilling over the past decade or so has revived that tradition, and back in 2017, several of New York's craft distillers unveiled the Empire Rye concept, both to promote the state's whiskey makers and help local farmers create a market for their grain. Rochester's Black Button Distilling was one of Empire Rye's founding distilleries when they came up with the idea in 2015. I spent some time the other day with Black Button founder Jason Barrett. Before we talk about Empire Rye, we need to talk about the developments in the craft world. You guys appear to have dodged a bullet for now with the export tariffs in Europe, at least. That has to be good news.
Yeah, that's certainly exciting, and I've got a number of friends that has big impact for. Black Button currently only exports to Japan, which was did not fall under this tariff. But anytime you're able to help small American businesses, put people back to work and use American agricultural products to generate great tasting craft products, that's a win in my book.
And you got help for the distilling industry, at least in terms of some tasting room help from the government through the American Rescue Plan that I'm sure is also a welcome change.
Yes, so a lot of the distilleries that were able to take advantage of that was very exciting to be included in the restaurant component of that. I guess in a good news sense, we didn't end up qualifying. We had made enough hand sanitizer that it had overtaken the revenue of what we lost in sales. Now, if only hand sanitizer had been a profitable endeavor. But I still count myself fortunate that we didn't need to tap that resource. So,
how have things been going for Black Button, surviving the last year in the pandemic, besides making unprofitable hand sanitizer?
I mean, in many ways, it was the year of two cities, the tale of two cities. We were busier than ever, and we did a lot of good in our community, and we kept all our people employed. And we only had one employee come down with COVID, and they luckily recovered. So, in that sense, we kept the family together. We kept everybody employed. We took care of everybody and our community with those 405,000 bottles of hand sanitizer. But at the same time, and I do think that taking care of the community paid dividends to us because we saw our sales stay steadier through the liquor stores than many other brands. Unfortunately, without tastings, without restaurants, without a lot of the festivals where people are experiencing our products, and with lower tasting room turnout, it has hit sales in a pretty major way. And we're continuing to see that even more so into 2021 as liquor stores are starting to slim down their inventories. And it's just, it's been a year since we could do those liquor store tastings on Friday night that are so crucial to our business.
How far behind do you think the past year and that lack of ability to really promote has hurt the Empire Rye movement? Because this is the 6th year for Empire Rye, but maybe we shouldn't count 2020. We should maybe just call this the 5th anniversary.
I mean, what's interesting about aged products, and that maybe this pandemic has done, there's so many puts and takes, and one benefit, I guess, is that a lot of folks, since they didn't sell all of their rye, the rye is now a year older. And so a lot of the stuff that's coming out has more age on it, which is always exciting to see. There was the minimum 2-year requirement, but as we all know, if you are able to give things more time, they can develop more character, more flavor. So it's been exciting to see a lot of the variants start to move to 3, 4, and even I've seen 1 5-year release under the Empire Rye. And I think we will see that as a trend for the next 3 or 4 years, as folks, again, are selling a little less than they had planned to make before the pandemic. That, of course, will come back to roost in 2023 or 4. I mean, a lot of distilleries didn't lay down much whiskey in 2020. And so that will likely snap back in about 4 years, would be my guess.
Let's go back for those who are not familiar with Empire Rye and explain the genesis of this, because this was really the craft distillers of New York State coming together to do something for the state to promote your distilling industry, right?
Correct. So yeah, it happened at one of the industry trade shows. We had just completed the medals where a number of distillers had won, and all the New York distillers gathered and were showing off various things and tasting bottles of what we had just won. And the discussion came up that many of us were making rye whiskey. That is the historical spirit for this area prior to Prohibition. And that there really did start to seem to be a unique sense of style here in New York. And so that led to many discussions amongst the original 8 distillers. What would make it an Empire Rye? We settled on a total of 6 requirements, but at one point it was like 25, and we had to find a good balance between what would be a distinctive style while also them being broad enough that many people would be able to comply with it. Because obviously if only like 2 of us were making it that way, well, that's just 2 funny guys in the back, not a style. So
what are those 6 requirements? Obviously it has to be distilled and fermented and mashed and matured in New York, right? But there are other requirements.
So that is definitely one of the requirements. Must be mashed, fermented, distilled, barreled, and aged at a single New York distillery. Must conform to the New York State farm distilling laws, being 75% New York grain. In this instance, 75% of the rye must be New York State grown rye, whether it's malted or raw rye, any combination thereof. The remaining 25% of the mash bill can be any raw or malted grains that you like, New York grown or otherwise. But we wanted to show off not just the place of New York, but how the rye grows up here. We have a shorter growing season, but we have a little more warmth than they get up in Canada. So we're kind of in a neat middle zone, and the rye takes on some unique characters that way. It has to be distilled at no more than 160 proof, aged for a minimum of 2 years in charred new oak barrels at no more than 115 proof. And that was really a very contentious discussion because obviously federally it can be 125, but we felt that barreling it at 115, which was the industry standard in New York prior to Prohibition, really again lent a certain quality to the final ingredient. And then if there is to be a blend of blended whiskey, all of the whiskey that goes into it would have to be Empire Rye. So you can't, myself and several other New York distillers could come together and do a blended Empire Rye, but you would not be able to take rye from Indiana or Kentucky and blend that with New York rye and still call it an Empire Rye. So it's got to be made here.
And this is a standard that you guys came up with. This is not a federal standard that the TTB enforces. This is one that is enforced within the New York State distilling community, right?
Yep. So the Empire Rye Association, which was put together by the original 8 distillers, put up the money to trademark the emblem that we use for this, and then also to have a little money to help promote everything. And we invite other distillers in New York State to join us. And if they agree to follow the rules, we're happy to have them as members. And the only dues are, again, to put money in to help promote Empire Rye as a category. We hope someday to petition the TTB to consider Empire Rye as an official designation, the way that Tennessee whiskey is an official designation. But we recognize that it's still a little early for that, and that although we have 10 distilleries with product on the market and another almost 20 with product in barrels coming to market. At the end of the day, we probably need to get another 20 or 30 distilleries on board before it's time to go to the feds and request that regional designation. The same way that AVAs on the wine side can take generations before there's enough wineries to make it a distinct place. So we're just getting started.
And I was about to ask, and I think you just answered the question of how many distilleries have jumped in over this 6-year period, but it appears to have become pretty popular among the other distillers who were not part of that original 8.
Yes. Yeah, no, it's been very well received. And a lot of folks, once they heard that we were doing it, were very happy to join it. And many of them, they were already doing these things because it does align well with the farm distilling laws here in New York. And the farm distilling laws, as long as you use 75% locally grown ingredients, you can have a tasting room and self-distribute and other things. And most distillers like working with local farms. It makes a better partnership. You get more quality control. You get more consistency. And there just wouldn't be a need to, haul stuff in from Iowa when you can grow it right up the street.
What has this done for the farmers in upstate New York in terms of creating a market for their grain? Yeah,
so rye, they've been growing rye here for 100 years, but always before it was just a cover crop that they plowed under. And it was a way to get nutrients back into the soil and prevent erosion. And so to now be able to offer them an actual revenue stream, I mean, what's been really interesting is that it's a slightly different combine technology than corn. And the only farmers that still have it fits like 8N Fords from like the 40s because there just hasn't been a market for, literally ours gets harvested on a machine from like 1948 instead of one of the modern big combines. And so it's a great opportunity for the farmers. And then also a lot of our spent grain goes back to those same farms where they grow beef cattle. And the beef cattle just love whiskey mash for breakfast the next day. It's about 15% of their feed that the farmers are getting just for the cost of transportation. So I like to joke, we don't actually buy the grain, we just rent it, and then we send it right back to the farm.
Where do you see Empire Rye going in the next 5 to 10 years? Because it's still hard to find Empire Rye shelves at the retailers, even in New York State. What do you do to promote this and create the category?
Yeah, we're definitely just getting started. A great retailer in New York might have 2 or 3 expressions of Empire Rye. I do think as these other 20 distilleries come on board in the next year or 2 with their stuff coming out, we will start to see that be an official section. And then as more distilleries are doing it, I believe that will create a come along effect. And, if we could get 100 of the 180 distillers in New York making Empire Rye, now you really would, have a component where people would be saying, okay, this has to, get some shelf space and get some recognition. In the meantime, we have events where we bring all the Empire Ryes together, or we will once those are possible again, in this post-COVID world we're moving into. We host podcasts and articles with members of the press like yourself, and try to spread the good word that we're doing something unique up here in New York. And if folks haven't tried it yet, we encourage them to go to EmpireRye.com. We list every distillery that is producing or committed to producing. And many of them now have direct-to-consumer shipping. So you can go to their websites, and if that distillery is set up appropriately, you can have bottles brought right to your front door. And that's just a wonderful opportunity that wasn't available a few years back where, how do you get a wholesaler to commit to 300 bottles of a really unique rye whiskey? It's not really worth their time to put it through their system and educate their staff on it. So I think that grassroots effort where we'll be able to reach targeted consumers that are advocates for creative distilling products, I think that's going to be huge for us.
Are you getting any support from the New York State government, or is that too much to hope for right now given COVID, or were you getting it before COVID?
So certainly they are amenable and appreciative of the idea. Distilling is still the redheaded stepchild. There's a lot of money for wine. There's a lot of money for beer. The cider industry is doing great with the New York State promoting that. It's not that they're not promoting distilling, but it's more passive than active. And we're working on that too. If we can show them that we really are creating jobs and using local grains, I think it's just still so new. Everybody's been to a craft brewery at this point. A lot of folks, I tell them I make gin, and they look at me cross-eyed. They're like, I didn't know you could make gin, and I usually say, well, someone has to, So I think we're just still very early as an industry. But overall, they are working on making the laws better. They are working on finding ways to support. Grand Central Station has a Taste New York shop right on the Upper Concourse. It's one of the only places in the state you can buy beer, wine, cider, spirits, coffee, baked goods, all made right in New York. And it's a special license. And, that puts us in front of 300,000 consumers a day. How many of them walk into that shop? It's probably not all of them, but it's still nice, to be right there and have people, if they're going to a dinner party, stop in and pick up a bottle of something local and try it with friends that they might not have if it wasn't quite right in their face. So those are ways that New York is supporting us.
Realistically, you say 180 or so distillers in New York. What's the market for this in terms of getting more and more distillers on board? Because not all of them are making whiskey.
Right.
But many of them could if they wanted to.
I mean, and these are rough numbers, not scientific, but from knowing the folks in the industry, about 80 of the 180 are making aged whiskey at this point. The other one's making, either vodka or gin or Amaros. So I would say, if we could get 60 of the 80 making Empire Rye, that would be a knock out of the park. And even 50 would be a great achievement. So the fact that we're already at 30 is pretty exciting.
Anything else you can add I didn't ask about?
No, just that we'd certainly encourage folks to try it and to check out their local distilleries and see what unique products they're making. And as always, folks get to vote with their dollars. If they want cool local distilleries in their communities, if they buy the products and drink those products, those businesses are that much more likely to be there the next day. So hopefully the products are of good value and folks keep coming back.
Thanks to Jason Barrett of Black Button Distilling for spending some time with us this week. There's a link to the Empire Rye website in the show notes for this episode at whiskycast.com. That's WhiskyCast In-Depth, brought to you by Oban. Every sip of Oban is like a postcard. Oban Single Malt Scotch Whisky is offering the chance to immerse yourself in Oban and the whiskey-making process through the Oban Abode experience. 2 winners will receive a trip to Scotland to stay in the Oban Abode, just steps from the distillery. To learn more and enter, visit obanabode.obanwhiskey.com. Complete rules are available at the website. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. Let's start off with Jason Barrett's own Empire Rye whiskey from Black Button Distilling. It's a 2-year-old straight rye bottled at 42% ABV, and my notes are for batch number 5. The nose has a hint of dill and garden herbs, along with honey, brown sugar, caramel, and muted spices. The taste has a nice balance of baking spices, rye bagels, honey, brown sugar, and a touch of oak. The finish, long and spicy, with a nice balance of sweeter notes in the background. I'm scoring the Black Button Distilling Empire Rye an 89. I mentioned the Whiskey Exchange's 20 Whiskeys That Changed the World tasting kit during the news. One of the 20 whiskeys in that set is the Springbank 10-year-old. It's been several years since I've tasted that one, so I thought it was worth updating. It's still bottled at 46% ABV, and the nose is briny with a subtle peatiness and hints of smoked salmon, heather, and subtle spices. The taste has a nice touch of lemon pepper at first, followed by peat and brininess, while honey and heather notes in the background add balance and complexity. The finish has a nice balance of lemony tartness, brine, and a hint of peat. It's a classic, and better than I thought it was years ago. I'm scoring the Springbank 10-year-old a 93. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, but first, this week's tasting notes are brought to you by Sagamore Spirit, the award-winning rye whiskey distillery based in Baltimore, Maryland. Try their signature cask and double oak rye whiskies, each one a proprietary blend of high and low rye mash bills. Sagamore Spirit has mastered the transformational art of blending. Learn more at sagamorespirit.com. Please drink responsibly. Ardbegg's Scorch is this year's Fagial bottling from the distillery, and while there is a committee version available, I received a sample of the Ardbeg Day Edition bottled at 46% ABV that will go on sale later this week. The nose is smoky and medicinal with a hint of creosote and touches of honey and dried flowers in the background. The taste starts off with a nice peatiness and grilled meats, while a peppery touch builds up slowly, and hints of honey, vanilla, and dried flowers linger in the background. The finish is long and gentle with a muted smokiness. It is not the fire-breathing dragon that the name indicates, but a good Ardbeg nonetheless. I'm scoring the Ardbeg Scorch a 92. Finally, Bruichladdie's new Port Charlotte PAC 01 single malt has just been released. It was distilled in 2011 and first aged in ex-bourbon barrels, then finished in Pauillac red wine casks from Bordeaux. It's bottled at 50.1% ABV. The nose has a good peatiness with touches of heather, honey, dried flowers, and a hint of brine. The taste is smoky with grilled pineapple, a touch of brine, lime zest, and honey. The finish is long and smoky with hints of spice and citrusy tartness. I'm scoring the Port Charlotte PAC 01 from Bruichladdie a 92. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. I'll be adding these whiskeys to our searchable list of more than 3,100 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at whiskycast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Small batch. How would you describe it? It's like an Irishman's understanding of baseball. Extremely limited.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Let's open up the inbox now for your voice. Had a lot of comments on our Happy Hour live webcast interview with Waterford's Mark Rainier the other night, including this one from our friend Sergios Florides of the Irish Whiskey magazine. Agree or disagree with Mark, you have to admire his steadfast belief and his passion in doing what he believes in. That is very true, Sergios. I disagree with Mark on some things, but it is hard to not respect his passion. Last time around, I shared my tasting notes for the Lagavulin Offerman Edition Guinness cask finish. Longtime listener Dave Kuhn posted this note on Instagram. I was lucky to have Mr. Offerman sign a bottle of 2014 Lagavulin 12-year-old right after having a dram of it with him at a book signing of his. Dave to Oak, Nick Offerman. I commissioned his wood shop to build a walnut display box for it, complete with splined miter joints and a glass window in front. It's the nicest piece of furniture we own. Nice. And for the record, Nick Offerman has a standing invitation to come on WhiskyCast whenever he would like to. If there is something you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always get in touch with us on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram at WhiskyCast. The email address is comments at whiskycast.com. Let's close out the show now with your voice, our look at the history, science, and other things that make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Writer's Tears. Whiskey has long played a role in diplomacy, but it can also be a tool of war. In this case, one of the coldest wars being waged currently anywhere in the world. That is in terms of both the temperature of the dispute as well as the climate. You see, Canada and Denmark have been at odds for almost 50 years over which country owns Hans Island. It's a really small Arctic island in the Harris Strait between Canada's Nunavut province and Greenland, which is part of Denmark. The border between Canada and Greenland runs right through Hans Island, and both countries claim ownership of it. Back in 1984, a team of Canadian soldiers went to Hans Island and, in the grand tradition of conquering explorers, planted the Canadian flag. They also left a bottle of Canadian whiskey with the flag. History does not tell us which brand it was. Soon after that, though, Denmark sent its own team to the island. They replaced the maple leaf with the Danish flag and the whiskey with a bottle of Danish schnapps. Ever since then, each side returns to Hans Island once in a while, replaces the other country's flag, and leaves behind a new bottle of whiskey or schnapps. History also doesn't tell us what happens to those bottles over time. The diplomats have never been able to resolve this dispute, and now that there are several Danish whiskey distilleries, maybe it's time for Denmark to swap out the schnapps for some Danish whiskey. Then again, maybe we could set up a joint whiskey tasting and negotiating session on Hans Island. I'll volunteer to be the mediator. If you have something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copper Pot, a rare style of Irish whiskey with a creative twist. A unique triple-distilled blend of single pot still and single malt premium Irish whiskies. Writer's Tears Copper Pot. Do you dare to be creative?
That's all for this edition of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, cocktail recipes, and, of course, a complete archive of all of our past episodes, going all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
Obrigado. That's Portuguese for thank you. All right, so I'm not exactly fluent, but I've learned a thing or two telling the story of Dewar's Portuguese Smooth. It's finished in pork barrels for a smooth, rich taste you won't find in any other whiskey. I may not be able to tell you where to find the best pastillas de nata in Lisbon, but I know how to say thank you. So obrigado, and cheers to staying curious.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
A pair of socks, a book, some suspect ties, a compact toolkit. Oh, another book. And a shaving kit. Actually, I could do with that. But anyway, sometimes you've got to take things into your own hands. Go on, treat yourself.
Happy Father's Day from Redbreast, proud sponsor of WhiskyCast.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2021, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening, and please stay safe.